see all of you with us this evening because we've got some special information that we want to share that makes our community really special. It's the details, it's the little things, it's making sure that we preserve the best part of Tifton for not only our generation but future generations to come. In my paying job, I have the opportunity to work in the real estate industry, and I cannot tell you how many times I have people that come into this community from other communities, and they're so impressed with our tree canopy. That's one of the first things that they say. And you can go into neighborhoods and you can look where there are no trees, and they're not areas that people necessarily want to be in. People want to be in areas that have a forest canopy and have green space and have all of the things that sometimes we take for granted, but we have to plan for. It doesn't just happen, especially in an urban area. So just want to take this opportunity to thank all of you for coming. I'd like to recognize George Validas, who is the chairman of the Tifton Tree Board. We're very fortunate to have a tree board. Several members are here that work diligently to make sure that our trees are preserved and they're part of this event that's happening this evening. Want to thank our friends with Green Infrastructure, so let's give them a welcome and turn the floor over to you guys. So
thank you so much. Can you guys, is this going? Is the mic on? Okay, perfect. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming out to this open house on tree canopy for the city of Tifton. My name is Matthew Lee. I work for a nonprofit called the Green Infrastructure Center. We partnered with the city of Tifton through a grant from the Georgia Forestry Commission, your state forestry agency, to map the canopy in the city and provide additional data for city staff as well as the tree board to help make decisions around the urban tree canopy moving forward, because as the mayor mentioned, it does take a lot of planning and effort to manage this resource. We like to consider trees infrastructure on the same equal level as roads or other utilities that are managed within the city. And so it does take a lot of effort and thought and participation because it is a community resource. So for tonight's presentation, I'm going to talk about, the data that we've produced so far over the course of this last year, working with the city staff and the tree board members. I'm going to talk a little bit about the canopy data, some of the different analysis that we have done, as well as the benefits that the trees are providing through what we call ecosystem services. So trees help improve air quality, they reduce surface temperatures, they help manage our stormwater. And we also took some time to review the city's codes and ordinances. It's not just about planting trees, but it's also about protecting the existing trees that you have in your community, because if a tree is cut down, it takes a long time for a newly planted tree to grow back and provide those services back to the community that you all need. And then we'll talk about some of the strategies that we have developed through the tree board and the city staff on how that management of that urban forest resource can happen in the future, and have set a proposed canopy goal. So after we present all this data to you all tonight, we'll have a question and answer period at the end of the presentation, but you all should have received some green dots, and you'll use those green dots after the presentation to vote on what your favorite strategies are. And this will really help us moving forward to decide and kind of prioritize different strategies on how to manage the urban forest resources in Tifton. So I just want to give a little bit of background on how we produce the data. So if you look in the upper left corner, we use aerial photography that's produced by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So the U.S. Department of Agriculture has a program called the National Agricultural Imagery Program, or NAEP for shorthand, because they love acronyms. But this is high-resolution aerial photographs that are flown every 2 to 3 years across the entire U.S. So it's a really good quality, consistent data source that we can use to help map tree canopy in different parts of the country. We use that imagery to generate what we call land cover. So we've taken that image and we've turned it into actual data. And we use that to classify what is tree canopy or what is other types of land cover, such as lawn or turf or impervious surfaces or water. In addition to mapping the land cover, we also map what we call potential planting areas. And these are places where you could easily plant a tree in the community. So think lawn and turf or bare earth in the city. We want to identify those places to understand how many trees could eventually or potentially be planted within the city's jurisdiction. Now, what we do is we work with local stakeholders such as the tree board or city staff to identify places where you wouldn't want to necessarily plant a tree. So think about a golf course or an athletic field, sometimes cemeteries or places like airports. The underlying land use doesn't really is not suited for planting a tree because there's other things going on. You don't want to plant a tree if you're trying to land an airplane. So we want to exclude those areas so that we're not considering them as plantable spaces. And we have a better representation or a picture of what's possible for your tree canopy going forward. Once we've excluded those areas from the data, we go into the bottom left image, which is what we call potential planting spots. And what we do is our model drops imaginary trees into those potential planting areas, kind of looking at setbacks away from roads, buildings, and other things on the landscape that you don't want to necessarily plant a tree too close to. We fill up as many of those potential planting spots in the city as possible, and we hypothetically grow this canopy out to maturity. So we drop large trees and small trees into the landscape. Large trees we define as having a 40-foot in diameter crown at maturity, and small trees we define as a 20-foot diameter crown at maturity. So we fill as many of those trees into the landscape as possible, hypothetically grow that canopy out, and then that tells us what your potential tree canopy is in the city. So by knowing what your existing tree canopy is and what your potential tree canopy is, we now have a window in which we can set a range for a canopy goal for the city. So depending on kind of the priorities for the community, what your current canopy level is, you could potentially set a goal to either maintain or increase your canopy. And we don't want to set a goal that is too high. We also don't want to set a goal that is beyond what is available within the city to actually achieve. You don't want to say, let's plant 50% canopy, and then you end up with only, being able to get to a maximum of 45%. You've already lost before you've started. So using data is really powerful to be able to help set a reasonable goal. GIC also doesn't really recommend trying to plant 100% of your areas. Even after excluding for those athletic fields and golf courses, we also recognize that maybe not everybody wants to plant a tree on their property. And people have a lot of different uses that they want for their private property. They may want to grow prize roses or vegetables. Some people like to mow grass. Maybe they need room in their backyard for a trampoline for their kids. There's any number of reasons why people may not necessarily want to plant a tree. And so we recommend really setting a cap at around 50% of the potential planting areas. And that way you're kind of setting a more realistic goal for your community. So looking at the data, we worked with the local stakeholders to review draft data. So we got some really great feedback from the city staff and the tree board members on what were some good plantable spaces and what were not some good plantable spaces. So we started out with about almost 1,200 acres, but once local folks looked at the data, that got reduced down to about 682 acres, which seemed more practical for having tree planting in Tifton. When we dropped those imaginary trees into it, we were able to fit almost 72,000 trees in that 682 acres, which came out to about almost 34,000 small trees and about almost 38,000 large trees. Your existing tree canopy is at 39%, and if you were to plant 100% of those potential planting areas, you could get to a maximum of 51%. Now, obviously, we don't recommend 100% of the PPA be planted, but it just gives us that window. So there's a 12% range in which you could set a canopy goal. Once we had the final data, then we started doing analysis by different areas of interest. And so some of the areas of interest that were chosen were the Downtown Development Authority, A lot of trees have been planted in this district over the last several decades, and they wanted to have a greater understanding of what was the potential planting areas in the existing canopy within this district. So the district has an average tree canopy of 29% and almost 5% of PPA, or about 35 acres. So despite the fact that downtown is, fairly dense with impervious surfaces, there's still quite a bit of room to plant more tree canopy in this district. So there's room to plant about 4,300 more trees in the district to get to a maximum of 37%. These are split between small trees, about 2,300 small trees, and about almost 2,000 large trees. And the important thing, or the key thing here, is that the large trees really give the most ecosystem or environmental benefits to your community. So we always like to encourage large trees over small trees, but sometimes small trees really are the only option available for certain spaces or for a variety of other reasons. Fullwood Park was another area of interest. It's a really great canopied park, a lot of great amenities in there. I noticed a new playground was going in. The park has an average of 86% tree canopy, and there's about almost a little over a half acre of potential planting area. So there's room to plant about 49 small trees and 29 large trees for a total of 78 more trees that could go into Fullwood Park, and what we could see in the aerial photograph. So while the canopy is currently pretty high in the park, one thing that we've noticed as we've been exploring around the city is that the canopy there, it's very mature, but it's also very even aged. So one of the things to consider here is planting that next generation of trees. So like everything, trees get old and they decline and they eventually die. They live a lot longer than we do, but they don't live forever. And so you have to be thinking about that next generation of trees, or eventually you're going to lose this canopy slowly over time. So by planting that next generation, you can maintain or sustain the high levels of canopy in Fullwood Park that you currently enjoy. Another area of interest were right-of-ways. This is looking at a distance within the center of the road. There was actually a variety of distances for the right-of-ways that were identified thanks to city staff input. Currently, there are 11 streets with the potential to increase canopy in the right-of-way by 10% or more. And 2 streets have less than 10% canopy, Millway and Oak Point Avenue. A total of almost 4,000 more trees could be planted within the identified right-of-ways. And some areas are going to require different planting standards and different strategies. So, for example, some of the tree canopy that is going to improve the canopy in the right-of-way may be strategies to encourage private property owners that live along those right-of-ways to plant trees in their front yards. So a tree giveaway strategy may be more appropriate to encourage planting of trees on private property. Since the city can't just go on private property and plant trees, there needs to be a variety of engagement strategies and outreach to the general community to get to plant trees on these right-of-ways. It could also be opportunities to identify for future utility upgrades or improvements, to design better tree wells or better standards for accommodating trees in the right-of-way. And some areas are just going to require that engagement with those private property owners to agree to plant trees on their properties. Schools was another area of interest. 8th Street Middle School, Matt Wilson and Northeast Middle School, and Tift County High School all had less than 10% tree canopy on their campuses. These 4 schools had room to plant an additional 1,500 more trees on these properties, and so this is already kind of excluding those athletic fields that I talked about earlier, where we're not going to want to plant trees. So there's still quite a room on these properties to plant trees. So this could be a great opportunity to engage the younger generation around tree planting and tree care, kind of create that next steward of our next generation of tree stewards within the community. It could also be a great opportunity to partner with the local universities to be able to plant trees and do that education. Oftentimes, there are volunteer requirements for middle and high school students as part of graduation. So this could be something that also could be integrated into working with teachers, the principals, and the PTA. So now I'm just going to move into talking about some of those ecosystem service benefits. So with the Canopy data, we were able to quantify how much of these ecosystem service benefits the Canopy is providing. One of those was looking at air quality. So trees have multiple ways of improving air quality. So for things like particulate matter, so exhaust that comes out of your car has fine particulate matter to it. That can be harmful for people's lungs and respiratory health. Trees will capture that by their leaves just from the air itself. They'll filter those particulate matter out of the air. Other types of air pollution, such as ozone. So we like to think of ozone as something that's beneficial, and it is when it's very high up in the stratosphere. It protects us from harmful UV rays. But when ozone is at ground level, it can actually be very harmful for lung tissue. It can increase asthma attacks in people. And so trees do a really good job of preventing ozone from developing at the ground level by casting shade and cooling down surface temperatures on the ground. Trees also can absorb some of these air pollutants into their tissues and keep it out of the air as well. So we're able to kind of quantify how many pounds per year of these different air pollutants trees are mitigating. So trees as an infrastructure are really critical for public health. So it's another way of kind of engaging or messaging to the community that trees are really great at helping to improve public health, especially with recent concerns around the pandemic and other respiratory diseases. By removing these air pollutants, it's helping to improve public health. Trees are also really great at sequestering carbon. So thinking of trees as a climate solution or a sustainability solution. Tifton's tree canopy currently sequesters about almost 4,000 metric tons per year of carbon. There's about 120,000 metric tons that are currently stored in the existing tree canopy of Tifton. So that's carbon that is not going into the atmosphere, is not contributing to things like climate change. And one of the biggest things that trees do is reduce what we call the urban heat island effect. So by using existing national data sets, so this data comes from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. It's looking at what the surface temperature is in Tifton on July 3rd of last year. So the darker the orange areas, those are the areas that are the hottest parts of the city. Now, this table here that you see is not something that we produced. This is data that's drawn from a study called Killer Heat in the United States. It was put out in 2019. And what they did was they looked at the historical record from 1971 to 2000 and documented the number of days that were above 100 degrees Fahrenheit in that period of time on average in any given year. And it was about 18 days per year in Tift County. Projecting that out into the future, into the years 2036 to 2065, it's anticipated that you're going to have about 81 days per year that are going to be above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So if a strategy or if a priority in the community is to reduce urban heat island impacts, you want to start planting trees now, because if you're trying to reduce surface temperatures into the future, it's going to take about 15 to 20 years for those trees to get large enough to actually cast the shade that you want to cool down the surface temperatures in the city. So I like to show that data because it kind of helps emphasize that if we're going to do action or we're going to make action on reducing things like urban heat island, we need to start planting the trees today so that we actually can feel the results of that in the future. So one of the things that we did was we combined the surface temperature data with US Census data, which is a really powerful tool to help us prioritize where to potentially plant trees in the community. So what we did was we looked at areas and neighborhoods of the city where the median household income is much lower than the average for Tifton. And we also looked to see where those places were both low income and the hottest areas. So now we can prioritize the lowest income neighborhoods that are also the hottest to potentially plant those trees and have a strategy moving forward on where to plant those trees and be more equitable about those tree plantings. So you can see in this map here, the red areas would be the priority areas that you'd want to plant because it's reducing surface temperature, and these are also the lowest income neighborhoods in the city. Trees are also really great at mitigating stormwater. So about 20% or more of rainfall that falls is actually captured in the crown of the tree alone. So they do a really great job of actually preventing surface runoff, which reduces the amount of trash or oil or other pollutants that are going into local waterways or into your municipal stormwater system. Because of that capture in the crown, it can also delay surface runoff. So storm events that we have are less flashy, which allows for that water to move through across the land and move through the system without causing further damage or erosion. And then, of course, the tree's roots are able to help us infiltrate that storm water into the ground and not become surface runoff as well. So the city's current tree canopy captures about 18 million gallons of stormwater every time it rains about 3.3 inches. So that's water that's not going into your local rivers or lakes. It's not going into your municipal stormwater system. It's allowing those pipes to be functioning and longer and require less repair. It also prevents about 24,000 pounds per year of nitrogen from going into waterways, about almost 2,000 pounds per year of phosphorus. So nitrogen and phosphorus create things like algal blooms, which prevent people from going swimming. It also can kill fish and other aquatic animals. And so you want to kind of prevent those pollutants from going into the local waterways because it causes problems for aquatic habitat. And then about 1,200 tons per year of sediment, which again is not good for fish and other aquatic organisms. So the canopy is doing a lot to help prevent further harm to your local waterways and other infrastructure. So we also created some maps to kind of illustrate what the canopy is doing. So the one on the right shows kind of where the existing tree canopy is doing the best job of mitigating or capturing that stormwater and helping to infiltrate it into the ground based on the underlying soils. The one on the left shows where the soils are really conducive to planting trees to help infiltrate that stormwater. So if you're trying to prioritize or identify places in the community to plant trees to mitigate stormwater impacts, you'd want to plant in the darker orange areas on the map on the left. Or if you're trying to minimize canopy loss and you want to prioritize the tree canopy that's doing the best job of capturing stormwater, you'd want to save areas in the darker green on the map on the right. And you can see those maps back here as well. I know it's kind of hard to see on the television screen. In addition to actually creating all this mapping data, GIC has developed a variety of tools over the years to help communities use this data in a planning context, both in daily and long-range planning. And so we provide these tools for free to the communities that we work with to help them come up with strategies, to help inform their different planning processes and make it more accessible when making decisions around setting a canopy goal or identifying future strategies. So what I like to say is actually, you all are beginning a journey on managing your urban forest resources, and we have provided a lot of tools, and we've helped you pack for that journey. So this is just kind of the first steps to the process. This is not the end result. So we're really creating a lot of data, providing a lot of tools that will help you be successful as you continue to manage your urban forest resources. So these are some of the tools. I won't go into all of them, but we used a lot of this data with our steering committee and provided a lot of context. And a lot of this information is going to go into a report that we're going to create for the city of Tifton. And that report will be a foundation as you continue to develop and plan further for your urban forests. I do want to touch on this just very briefly. We did an examination or an audit of all of your existing tree codes and ordinances. With that, we looked at kind of essential elements. So these are things that would have the biggest impact if you made changes or updates to your codes for. We had desired elements, which you're going to get some benefits from, but they're not as essential as obviously the essentials. And then we have extras kind of in there where you could go above and beyond if you were to make those changes, but they're obviously not as important as the essential and desired components. So by looking at these variety of questions, we reviewed the code. We also interviewed staff to find information and get further information about how your codes and ordinances are deployed within the city. We were able to score how well you did. You had about 50% of the essential elements that we like to see in a city's codes and ordinances related to trees, about 43% for those desired, and about 41% for the extras. So really the recommendations that we focused on by looking at the codes and ordinances were to elevate those essential and desired elements in your codes and ordinances. I won't read through all of these. We will be having the presentation made publicly available. We'll also share the slides with you all, and you will also be able to find this information in the report that we generate. But some of the kind of top or key recommendations that came out of the audit were things to do a better job at protecting trees during the development process. So things such as putting fencing around trees that you want to save. So these would be large trees on site, which are providing the most ecosystem service benefits, providing the most value to the community, doing more to protecting those during the development process. And then when those trees are taken down, when they're supposed to be saved, establishing penalties for the replacement of those trees. Other things that y'all are currently working on or this data will allow to kind of facilitate is a urban forest master or management plan. There has been some inventory work done in places like Fallwood Park, but inventory data would provide additional data or context that the Canopy data can't. So for example, the Canopy data can't tell us what species are in your urban forest. Now, there's a lot of pine trees around. You kind of know that by driving around. But in terms of the breakdown of the different species that are in your urban forest, the Canopy data can't tell us that because we're just looking at the tops of the trees. But an inventory would. So there's different other types of data collection that we haven't done, but you could do in the future to give you more information as you manage your resource. Other things can be around urban forest management and emergency management. So there's ways of making your urban forest more resilient in the wake of storms. So there's less debris and less trees are lost. And then there's also recommendations in here on how to potentially reduce impervious surfaces. So that's kind of the flip side of the coin here. Planting more trees is really great, but also there could be strategies where you're trying to reduce impervious surfaces because that's creating more stormwater runoff. That's also creating more urban heat island impacts in your community. And so with these recommendations presented to the city and to the tree board, a lot of these were internalized and came up with as part of their strategies. So the proposed canopy goal for Tifton is maintain the current canopy of 39% over the next 10 years. And for that to happen, this will require planting about almost 700 trees per year over the next 10 years, or about almost 7,000 trees. So just maintaining your canopy at 39% over the next 10 years is going to require a pretty aggressive tree planting initiative, not only at the city level, but in the wider community as well. Because the urban forest resource is not the sole responsibility of the city. It's a community resource. The city in general typically only owns or manages about 20% of the land and the right-of-way within its jurisdiction. So physically, the city can't manage the entire resource on its own. The other 80% is under private property ownership. And so there's going to be a variety of strategies and solutions that are going to require the entire community to come together and talk about and make decisions around. So what we have are about 14 urban forest strategy ideas. You can also see them on these flip charts on here. I'm going to talk about them really briefly. Ask questions at the end about these strategies or other things on. But we really want you all to weigh in on these strategies. So use those green dots to vote on what you think are the best ideas going forward, and that will really help us when working with the tree board and the city staff on identifying what are next steps going forward on the strategies. So identify emergency routes, assess risk, and mitigate tree hazards along them. So that's storm planning. Require more trees in the development code for parking lot designs. There's some pretty large parking lots that have 0 trees. I don't know about you, but when I park in a parking lot, I always try to find that space that's under a tree. And there's some parking lots that don't have any. Add incentives to the development code to reduce imperviousness. So again, reducing those impervious surfaces is going to be really key. It's going to help you keep your community cooler, less stormwater running off. Integrate more space for tree plantings in right-of-ways that need utilities moved. So upgrades to utilities need to happen. Sewer lines need repair. Water lines need repair. So if the city is doing that repair work, it's a great opportunity, since the roadbed is being dug up, to repair those lines, create better spaces for new trees to be added if there aren't already there. Require tree replacement when protected trees are removed during development. So currently, there's no penalties for removing trees that are supposed to be saved during the development process. Requiring developers to replace those trees if they remove them is key. Create a tree donation fund to support tree plantings in the community. So oftentimes there's not enough funds for the tree planting that needs to happen, and so a donation fund. Sometimes communities will set this up as a memorial tree fund, for example, so people can donate in honor of a loved one. It's a great way to remember a loved one in the community, but also generate some funding to plant more trees, which are going to benefit everybody in the city. Apply for funds to bury electrical lines and install tree wells to increase resiliency. So overhead wires are a limiting factor on where we can plant trees. The FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, has grant funding programs where they will help a city pay for the cost of burying electrical lines, which means there's going to be less outages during storms. But during that process, you can also be able to apply for funds to plant trees. So you're getting trees installed in your community, but you're also making your community more resilient in the wake of storms and tornadoes from the power going out. Plant more trees in the right-of-ways on city-owned properties and in parks. Prioritize low canopy neighborhoods for hosting public tree giveaways. So tree giveaways are a great way to get trees to residents to plant them on private property. Plant trees and educate students at Tift County schools and universities. So again, encouraging that next generation to plant trees and steward your trees. Plant trees at Tifton Public Housing Authority community properties. These properties are oftentimes, and this is not just an issue for Tifton, but we've seen this across the U.S., for whatever reason, public housing properties, I guess it's easier to maintain just lawn, and so they typically don't have any trees. And so in August, those properties and those units cook. And so encouraging more trees planted on those properties will make those residents a lot happier. Identify overly paved sites and remove impervious surfaces to allow for more space for planting trees. So kind of doing some retrofits in the community. And plant trees around retention ponds and places where it still provides access for maintenance. So again, trees as a stormwater solution. And there's oftentimes a lot of spaces around these retention ponds. And we can't see the 14th one, but that one is create partnerships and educational program in urban forestry in the city. So again, it's really leveraging the variety of people that live in the city, different community groups, other institutions, churches, hospitals are also other great places where there's a lot of land to plant trees. Identifying those partnerships, sororities maybe, or people that other community groups, scouts that are looking for volunteer opportunities. There could be great ways to leverage those individuals that may be passionate about the environment or their community to help with this, because again, it's going to take everybody working together to get this done. So that's all I have for the presentation today. I'm happy to do some Q&A with you all. If you are ready, you can feel free to go up and do some voting. We also have an opportunity for you to write down your own thoughts or ideas, either if you have some strategies or you just want to make some general public comments. If you don't want them, write them up for everybody to see. We also have index cards up here where you can write them and drop them in that basket, and we'll record them and make sure that it gets all summarized as part of the open house. But I'm going to open it up here to see if there's any questions from the audience. Yes?
I don't see as a strategy of prioritizing native species, and you're going over ecosystem benefits.
Mm-hmm.
That's a huge ecosystem benefit.
Absolutely.
And so forth, and nutrition that they need from native plants. Because I was actually looking at this booklet, and the understory tree species, I think there's 4 that are native and like the other 15 or so are non-native. So I would put that I would vote for that as a strategy.
Absolutely. And if there's new strategy ideas that you want to vote for, definitely come up and do that.
I'm always party on the keyboard, and that is something that I advocate for. Our understory plantings with the overhead power lines
Right.
on the site, and that they are our biggest challenge. And so in December, when we put a lot of this plan together, that is something I worked really hard to try to get in as much of that, working with the rest of the tree board as we possibly can,
Right.
while maintaining some public safety
Sure.
and security of the power.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And y'all have done a good job overall. I just wanted to say, I just didn't see it, the consultants, I didn't see that as one of their strategies.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I have a comment here from somebody in the community who was not able to attend.
Sure.
More or less along the same lines as the previous comment. The suggestion was prioritizing the removal of invasive species and replacing them with native.
Yeah, and some of the challenges that we see are invasive vines that grow up into the tree canopy. It may not seem intuitive, but those vines can be very heavy, and it can cause trees to be, fall down. So like ivy or kudzu or other invasive vines can be very harmful for existing trees.
But I think this comment is more specific to trees that are invasive.
Okay.
I'd like to add on to that, which is really just taking a little step further, is avoid any kind of giveaways and planting of those trees, including crepe myrtle, Chinese elm. I've been working with a group of people at the GMA Nature Trail. There are a huge number of camphor trees there, and other really bad invasives. They need to be.
Yeah, the crepe myrtles and some of the elms have been way overplanted in communities across the South for sure. And our previous assumption was like, oh, nothing can kill a crepe myrtle, but there's actually stuff that is now showing up that is weakening crepe myrtles and making them get this black sooty mold over them. So they're not as invincible as we once thought, but they're definitely overplanted in a lot of communities. Any other questions or comments? Good stuff. Okay, well, if you want, you can look at the maps. I'm going to be around, walking around. If you have any questions, feel free to approach me or Derek and ask any further questions. Please, we do encourage you to vote because that's really going to help us identify what you all think are the best strategies moving forward. We've got some additional ones up here. Don't forget about as well. But thank you all for coming out and appreciate your time.